As the winter night fell heavy upon the great hall of Trondheim, Viking King Harold Hardrada withdrew from the noise of feasting and song. The hearth-fire had been lowered to a steady glow, its embers breathing warmth into the timbered hall where warriors now lay sprawled in drink-heavy slumber. Yet for the Viking King, the hour of true strength was only beginning. Why Viking royals are masters of rest lies not in their raids, nor in their swords, but in the way they surrendered themselves to night with the same command they held in battle. For in slumber, a ruler did not weaken, he was reforged. Harold's bed was no common pallet. Elevated above the draught-laden floor, enclosed by carved oak panels and shrouded with thick woolen curtains, it was a fortress within a fortress. His servants had prepared it with bear furs beneath and soft linen above, the coverings chosen with care to keep warmth without suffocation. Here, the Viking king cast aside his crown and weapons, but not his vigilance. For sleep to him was a shield as vital as any steel, guarding the mind and body for the trials of tomorrow. Around him the hall fell to quiet. Shield-maidens positioned themselves nearby, ever watchful even as they prepared for their own rest. The sound of the storm against the walls was met not with dread, but with comfort. For, to the Norse, the howling wind was the god's own lullaby. As Harold closed his eyes, he did so with the certainty that rest was no weakness, but a gift granted by night itself. The sagas spoke often of Viking kings whose memories were sharp, whose judgments were keen, and whose strength endured beyond the years of ordinary men. They did not rage against the night, nor did they squander it. They bent to it, mastered it, and emerged stronger. Harold knew this truth well, that sleep was not the end of his power, but the root of it. Tomorrow, when dawn rose pale, and the fjords glistened with frost, he would stand renewed, his body restored, his mind sharpened as if by Odin's hand. For the Vikings, and most of all their royals, night was more than darkness. It was the forge of endurance, the quiet hour where dreams spoke, wounds healed, and strength returned. And so, as the king drifted into that deep, timeless silence, the hall itself seemed to bow with him, surrendering to the rhythm of rest that had made Norse rulers not merely men, but legends. In the north, where winters bite hard and summers burn long with restless light, the people knew that strength was not only measured in steel and fury. The Vikings, and most of all their kings, held a wisdom that many lands forgot, that sleep was a weapon. To close one's eyes was not surrender, but the gathering of power. Sleep as strength, not weakness, was the creed that underpinned their vigour, their ferocity, their endurance in war and council alike. When the feasts ended and the halls grew quiet, save for the crackling of the hearth, the Norse ruler understood that the night itself was his ally. By yielding to slumber, he was not diminished. His body knit torn sinew, his mind sharpened like a whetstone against steel. The sagas spoke of Harold Fairhair, who could recall the deeds of warriors met but once, and of Olaf Tryggvason, whose judgments carried the weight of clarity that lesser kings, drunk on sleepless pride, could never match. These feats were not won only by bloodline or God's favour. They were born of nights given wholly to rest, where the soul walked strange roads and returned unburdened. A king who scorned sleep was a king doomed to falter. The shield-maidens whispered it as they kept watch, and the healers knew it well. A body driven past its measure grew brittle as old wood. A mind denied its dreams grew clouded, blind to omens and stratagems. To the Norse, such folly was weakness, for a leader who could not master his rest would soon fail in the hour of trial. Halfdan the healer spoke often of this truth. The axe breaks if it is never set down, so too the man who never yields to night. Even in their sagas, dreams held weight, carrying warnings, blessings, and secrets from the gods. To sleep was to open oneself to wisdom, beyond the waking world, to stand in the quiet between realms where fate whispered. A king who dreamt was a king who listened, and thus he walked each day with knowledge few could claim. The common folk may have seen their rulers as tireless, but within the woven curtains of their beds, Viking royals practiced mastery of a different kind. By embracing sleep fully, they stood each morning with their strength renewed, their minds steady, their resolve like stone. It was this hidden discipline, as much as their iron blades and roaring war cries, that gave them dominion. For in the north, all knew the truth: those who fought the night grew weak, but those who mastered it ruled as giants among men. The north gave both hardship and gift, and those who thrived beneath its skies were shaped by its strange rhythm of light and dark. In summer, the sun lingered above the horizon until midnight and beyond, washing the fjords in a pale glow that refused to yield to true night. In winter, darkness stretched like a cloak, swallowing the land for weeks, with only the faint shimmer of stars or the green flicker of the northern lights to break its hold. These extremes forged not only the Viking spirit in battle, but also their mastery of rest. The gift of the north was not its beauty alone, but the way its cycles of day and night honed the body and mind into perfect balance. When King Olaf Tryggvason stood upon the prow of his ship at midsummer, he marvelled at how the sky refused to darken. He and his warriors did not fight against the light, but embraced it, shortening their sleep, yet deepening its power. They worked and raided through the long days, collapsing at last into slumber, so complete that a few short hours restored them like a full night's rest. The endless light was not a thief of their strength, it was a forge, hardening them for the tasks of summer conquest. Yet when winter came, it was another tale. The same land that denied night in summer now gave it back in abundance. For weeks, the hall lay in shadow, the fire its only Sunday. Here, the Norse turned to a different rhythm. They slept long and deep, wrapped in furs, rising only for feasting, council, or brief labours before surrendering once more to the dark. This was no idleness. It was the body yielding to the season, gathering power, healing wounds, and sharpening thought during the long silence. Dreams in those black months were said to be strongest, carrying visions from gods and ancestors, for the world itself seemed closer to the realm beyond. Unlike kings in the south, who burned candles into the night and strained against nature, Viking royals bent to it, and in that bending they grew stronger. Their very blood knew how to rise with the blazing midsummer sun and how to hibernate with the devouring winter dark. They lived not against the heavens but in step with them, their sleep shaped by the great wheel of Sol and Mani, sun and moon. It was this harmony that set them apart. Their bodies learned resilience, their minds clarity, their dreams power. The gift of the North was a cycle that many feared, yet the Norse embraced it as a blessing. In the endless summer light, they became relentless. In the unbroken winter night, they became unshakable. And it was this rhythm of extremes, this dance between day without end and night without dawn, that made Viking royals masters of rest, and through rest, masters of themselves. The seasons in the north were not gentle, nor were they meant to be. They ruled with iron hands, summer blazing with endless twilight, winter drowning the world in shadow. Yet from this harsh balance, the Norse drew a rhythm of sleep unlike any other, a cycle of rest forged by the sky itself. In the months when the sun refused to set, Viking royals learned to rest in brief but potent stretches, their bodies falling into slumber as fierce and intense as their waking hours. And when the long winter dark laid its heavy hand upon the land, they surrendered to its call, sleeping deep and long, as though cradled by the earth itself. In midsummer, the sky burned pale gold even at midnight, the horizon glowing as though the gods themselves were stoking some eternal forge. King Harold Fairhair would often tell his men that in such times sleep was no enemy but a tool short, sharp, and renewing. A few hours upon his furs, shielded by thick curtains from the ghostly twilight, gave him the strength to rise and lead his warriors at dawn, though dawn and dusk were one. Their sleep was like their raids, swift, unyielding, and enough to sharpen blade and mind alike. But winter was another kingdom altogether. When snow buried the land and the night stretched for nearly a full day's turn, the halls grew warm with fire and heavy with silence. Here the royals embraced slumber as a second life. Wrapped in furs, they slept long and often, waking for food, counsel, or tale-telling before returning to the comfort of their beds. It was in these months that their dreams deepened, their bodies healed, and their minds turned inward. The sagas tell of kings who received visions in the black of winter nights, omens of battle, glimpses of fate, whispers of gods. In this season of shadow, sleep itself became sacred. Unlike southern lords who battled against time with candles and restless courts, Viking rulers yielded to the turning of seasons. They knew there was strength in bending with the year's rhythm. To sleep little in summer was not deprivation, for the intensity of their rest carried them through. To sleep long in winter was not sloth, but wisdom, for the body needed silence as much as the sword needed its sheath. This was the law of the North, that man must rise with the restless summer sun, and he must descend with the heavy winter dark. Those who resisted grew brittle, their health failing. Those who followed thrived, becoming the unshakable figures remembered in saga and song. For it was not only in battle or voyage that Viking royals proved their mastery, it was in the way they made allies of both twilight and dark, shaping their rest to match the eternal cycle of the sky. In the long halls of the north, when the fire was banked low and the night stretched heavy upon the land, sleep did not come as a single unbroken tide. It came in waves. The Vikings knew this rhythm well, and their royals mastered it, the double sleep of the north. First came a deep, heavy slumber, the body surrendering to the weight of exhaustion, muscles loosening, breath steady as the fjords in still water. Then, after some hours, a gentle, waking, quiet, natural, untroubled. This was the hour between, a time neither of full rest nor of full waking, when thought and dream mingled like smoke curling from the hearth. It was in this space that kings and jarls often found their sharpest clarity. The sagas tell of men rising in the middle of the night to stir the fire, sip mead, or walk the quiet hall while their household slumbered. Far from weakness, this interval was prized. Counsel was considered in those hours, decisions weighed in silence, and dreams remembered with greater force. For the Norse believed that first sleep carried the body to the realm of strength, while second sleep carried the mind to the realm of vision. King Olaf Haraldsson was said to use this time between sleeps to compose verses and consider disputes that had troubled him by day. By morning, his judgments carried the weight of wisdom beyond his years, as though the gods themselves had whispered to him in the pause between slumbers. Shield-maidens too, like Thyra, valued this hour, rising quietly to check the hall's doors and hearth, ensuring both warmth and safety before returning to her furs. It was a discipline of vigilance wrapped within the gift of rest. When second sleep returned, it did so lightly at first, then deepened into a dream-rich slumber. In this stage, the Norse believed messages from the other world came strongest visions of battles yet to be fought, warnings from the dead, or blessings from the gods. A king who honoured this rhythm carried not only a body refreshed, but a mind sharpened, his memory keen, his resolve strengthened. Unlike men of later ages who cursed waking in the night as an ailment, the Norse embraced it. They understood it was part of nature's design, as steady as the turning of the seasons. To fight it was folly, to use it was mastery. This acceptance turned the double sleep into a tool, one that made Viking royals not only warriors of the day, but masters of the night. For in those quiet hours between, when darkness pressed close and silence ruled the hall, the seeds of power were sown. Their bodies restored in the first sleep, their minds sharpened in the second. They rose with dawn, not merely rested, but remade giants among men, with the wisdom of both waking and dreaming bound within them. In the stillness of the Viking night, when the embers of the hearth glowed low, and the hall sank into silence, sleep became more than rest. To the Norse, dreams were not idle fancies of the mind, but messages carried across the veil, gifts from the gods, and whispers from the ancestors. Kings and warriors alike placed weight upon what they saw in slumber, for within those visions lay counsel for war, warnings of betrayal, and glimpses of fate itself. Dreams from the gods were regarded as a compass, guiding rulers through storm and steel. The sagas tell of King Harold Fairhair dreaming of a great tree, its roots sinking deep into the earth, its branches stretching over all of Norway. The dream was taken as a sign of his destiny to unify the land, and with such conviction he pursued it until the prophecy was made flesh. Olaf Haraldsson, who later became Saint Olaf, was said to dream of radiant figures who urged him toward the path of Christian kingship, visions he believed were not mere phantoms of the night but divine commands. These dreams gave rulers strength greater than armies, for they carried the weight of inevitability. Among warriors, too, dreams carried power. Before great battles, men sought the night for omens, and many entered combat already knowing their fate. A vision of a raven flying overhead might promise victory, while a dream of drowning foretold death. To the Norse, such warnings did not always bring despair, but resolve. If death was certain, a warrior entered the shield wall with acceptance, ready to meet Valhalla. If victory was promised, his sword struck with the force of certainty. The quiet hours between first and second sleep were thought especially potent when the boundary between worlds was thinnest. It was then that jarls and kings often pondered what they had seen, weighing the meaning of strange images. A serpent coiled around gold might warn of treachery. A ship sailing into storm could foretell the dangers of an alliance. Wise rulers did not dismiss such visions, but sought their skalds, seers, or healers to interpret them, blending dream and reason into the course of action that shaped kingdoms. Dreams were not seen as weakness or madness, but as sacred channels, proof that the gods took notice of mortal men. The Allfather himself, Odin One-Eye, was said to send visions to those he favoured or tested, gifting knowledge through riddles that only the wise could unravel. For this reason, Viking rulers treated sleep not only as restoration, but as counsel. To close their eyes was to open their minds to voices that could not be heard in daylight. Thus, when dawn broke and kings rose from their furs, they did so, carrying more than strength of body. They bore the weight of dreams that guided their hands in peace and war alike, divine whispers woven into the fate of men. In this, Viking royals were not merely masters of rest, they were interpreters of the gods themselves. When the last horns of mead had been drained, and the voices of the skalds faded into silence, the Viking hall transformed. What by day rang with laughter, clashing weapons, and counsel became at night a sanctuary of rest. Yet this change did not happen by chance. The longhouses of the Norse were crafted with cunning, their design shaping not only the life of the household, but the quality of its slumber. The Hall of Quiet was as carefully built as the ship of war, and for the royals who ruled within it, sleep was guarded by timber and fire as fiercely as by sword and shield. At the centre of every great hall burned the hearth, the living heart of the household. By day, it gave warmth for feasts and flame for cooking, but by night it glowed low, its embers banked to cradle sleepers in steady heat. Beds were never scattered carelessly. They were drawn along the sides of the hall, close enough to the hearth to drink its warmth, yet far enough to escape its smoke. For kings and jarls, the sleeping place was raised high, a wooden platform built above the draughts that crawled along the earthen floor. There they lay, not as men exposed, but as rulers enclosed in chambers of wood and wool. These sleeping enclosures, often called bed closets, were carved with panels and veiled with thick curtains. To draw those curtains was to summon darkness as deep as a cave, sealing away flickering light and muffling the sounds of the hall. Within, a Viking royal found silence, warmth, and the embrace of firs layered thick against the northern cold. Such spaces were not mere beds, but sanctuaries, small fortresses of rest in a world where the night could carry both storm and enemy. The arrangement of sleepers spoke of order and vigilance. Around the king's alcove lay his shield-maidens and closest guards, forming circles of protection. Beyond them, family, warriors, and servants took their places, each according to rank. The architecture itself upheld this design. Narrow walkways allowed movement without waking others, and elevated platforms gave those on watch a clear view of the doors. It was a hall not only of feasting and council, but of secure, undisturbed rest. Even the materials chosen for the hall spoke of wisdom. Timber walls, often layered with clay or turf, held warmth and dulled the roar of the wind. Roof vents carried smoke upward and away, keeping the air within clean and fit for breathing. The Norse knew which woods burned sweetly, and which gave off soothing scents, pine, birch, or juniper aromas that eased the mind into slumber. Thus the longhouse itself became a keeper of sleep, its design tuned to the needs of both body and spirit. To enter the hall of quiet was to lay down the burdens of the day, to close one's eyes in safety and rise renewed. For the Vikings, architecture was not only shelter, but a weapon against weariness, ensuring that kings and warriors awoke each dawn ready once more to master the world. Within the timbered halls of the north, where frost crept through the cracks and winds howled like wolves beyond the walls, comfort was not a luxury, it was survival. Yet the Vikings, and most of all their royals, turned this necessity into mastery. Curtains of wool and fur transformed their sleeping chambers into sanctuaries of warmth and silence, where the body found peace and the spirit slipped easily into dreams. To step behind those heavy hangings was to leave the world of noise and cold, and to enter a cocoon of rest shaped by skill, wealth, and ancient wisdom. The bed of a king was never bare wood. First came the base, layered with straw or heather to lift the body from the chill of the ground. Upon this were placed furs, thick pelts from wolf, bear, or reindeer, each chosen for season and purpose. In the depth of winter, fox or bear skins wrapped the sleeper in unyielding warmth, while lighter sheep's wool served in the gentler months. For those of highest rank, feather mattresses and down-filled cushions brought softness unknown to common folk, their comfort rivaling that of any throne. To lie upon such bedding was to sink into the earth's embrace, shielded from the bitter hand of the north. But it was not only beneath that mattered. Above, linen sheets woven fine and smooth cooled the skin, while more furs were layered atop, heavy enough to anchor the sleeper in stillness. The weight of these coverings was no accident. It pressed away the restless twitch of muscles, calmed the breath, and gave the mind to deeper sleep. To draw a wolf pelt over one's chest was to borrow the beast's strength through the night, a silent pact between man and nature. The curtains themselves were a marvel. Thick woolen hangings, sometimes embroidered with runes or scenes of saga, sealed the bed like the walls of a chamber. They held in warmth, muffled the clamour of the hall, and cast the sleeper into near total darkness. Within this cave of fabric, a king was free from the draught of doors, the flicker of flame, the murmur of servants. He slept as if in the womb of the earth itself, untouched, untroubled, utterly restored. To the Vikings, bedding was more than comfort. It was a mark of power and status, a sign that the gods favoured a man with both rest and might. The poorest might huddle in straw with only a rough woolen cloth, but the royals slept as though they carried the strength of beasts and the silence of caves into their dreams. And when dawn returned, breaking against the shutters of the hall, they rose from those curtains of wool and fur, not weakened by night, but forged anew, ready to carry their fury and wisdom into the day, As the sun climbed high over the fjords and the clang of work gave way to the call of horns, the Vikings gathered for their great midday meal. This was the true feast of the day, when warriors, farmers, and kings alike filled their bellies with roasted venison, smoked fish, and bread of barley still warm from the hearth. Horns of mead and ale passed from hand to hand, not in reckless excess, but in measured strength, for this was the hour when the body was meant to take its heaviest nourishment. The feast before rest did not come at night, as it did in foreign courts, but beneath the noon sun, when the fire of digestion could burn alongside the fire of the day. By evening, when shadows stretched long across the hall and the sagas began, the fare was different. Kings and their households did not weigh themselves down with slabs of meat or casks of drink. Instead, they took only light offerings, dried berries, a few nuts, a piece of bread softened with cultured milk or honey. Such food soothed the stomach, but did not burden it, allowing the body to fall into sleep with ease. To eat heavily at night was seen as folly, for it chained the belly to labour when the mind and limbs longed for peace. A warrior who gorged before bed was said to dream of battle and wake weaker than he had laid down. King Olaf Tryggvason was known for his discipline in this matter. He would rise from the long benches at dusk, refusing more than a small cup of milk with hazelnuts and honey before retiring. "A man who feasts when the sun is gone," he told his companions, "wakes with lead in his limbs and fog in his thoughts. Strength is fed by day, but restored by night." His rule became law in many households, where evening was for story and song, not for feasting. This rhythm, though born of necessity, became a weapon. By giving their bodies time to settle before night, Viking royals ensured their rest was unbroken, their sleep deep, and their dreams untroubled. The hall that might roar with laughter at noon grew calm by twilight, its people nourished but unburdened, ready to embrace the dark with clear minds and steady breath. The healers, too, knew the wisdom of it. Halfdan the wise counselled warriors that to eat like the bear at dusk is to sleep like the restless fox. Better instead to end the day with lightness, so that slumber might come swiftly, as silent and sure as snow falling upon the roof. Thus the Vikings mastered not only the art of war and voyage, but the art of when to feed and when to rest. By honouring the feast at midday and showing restraint at night, they turned their meals into allies of slumber. And in this, as in so much else, the royals of the north proved themselves masters of both body and dream. As twilight deepened over the fjords and the hall quieted to murmurs and fire crackle, the Norse royals turned to a ritual as old as their lineages. It was not the horn of mead nor the heavy platters of meat that accompanied the day's labour, but a gentler draught, crafted with care by healers and housewives alike, milk, honey, and hazelnuts. This humble mixture, served warm in carved horns or clay cups, was no idle indulgence. It was the key to a night of dream-rich slumber, a potion of calm that carried kings and warriors into the arms of rest. The milk, fresh from goat or cow, was heated at the hearth until steam curled softly into the night air. Into it, golden honey was stirred, drawn from hives tended through summer meadows and stored with reverence for winter's lean. Crushed hazelnuts, gathered from northern groves, were sprinkled within, their oils releasing richness that lingered on the tongue. Together, these gifts of land and bee were more than food. They were medicine, crafted by tradition to soothe the body and quiet the spirit. King Olaf Tryggvason was famed for ending his nights with this draught. The sagas speak of him lifting the warm cup, after the last tale was told, sipping slowly as the fire dimmed. "This drink," he would say, "carries me to the silence, where strength is born again." His warriors, who followed his example, found that sleep came swiftly and without burden, their dreams vivid yet untroubled. The sweetness of honey calmed the heart, the milk steadied the belly, and the nut's earthiness gave a sense of grounding, as though the body were being anchored for the voyage of the night. Healers like Halfdan understood its deeper worth. Milk cools the fire within, he taught his apprentices. Honey stills the restless blood, and the hazelnut binds both to the strength of earth. Such knowledge was passed from hand to hand, not written in books, but lived in practice. And in its simplicity lay its power, for even the mightiest king required the gentlest of helps to surrender himself to rest. Beyond its bodily ease, the mixture carried a symbolism the Norse cherished. Milk was life's first sustenance, honey, a divine gift guarded by bees, and the hazel tree was sacred, tied to wisdom and fate in old belief. To drink these together was to honour the cycle of life, the bond of man with nature, and the unseen ties between body, spirit, and the world beyond. Thus, when the hall's curtains were drawn and the storm raged outside, Viking royals found peace not only in furs and fire, but in the simple draught of milk, honey, and hazelnuts. It was their passage into dreams, their shield against restlessness, and their secret to waking strong as dawn touched the northern sky. For even kings knew that mastery of the night began with the gentlest of offerings. In the deep hush of evening, when the great hall sank into shadows and the last sparks of fire glowed low, another guardian of Viking rest stirred to his work. Halfdan the healer, grey of beard and steady of hand, walked the length of the herb store with practised eye. Where warriors trusted axe and shield, Halfdan trusted root and flower. He knew that even the fiercest king must bow to night, and for that journey he offered the strength of plants, the herbal guardians that guided royals into true and unbroken sleep. From the shelves he drew bundles of dried valerian root, its bitter scent strong enough to turn the nose of the untrained. To Halfdan it was no foulness but a gift, for it calmed the racing mind and stilled the restless body. Many times had he seen jarls, plagued by anxious thoughts, slip into deep slumber after a draught laced with its power. The root of quiet, he called it, and in truth it was as vital to a ruler as steel was to a warrior. Next he turned to hops, green cones gathered in summer's height and left to dry with care. In the hall they were steeped into drink, their bitterness softened with honey. Hops dulled the edge of tension, loosening the knots wound tight in shoulders and chest. To kings wearied by counsel or shield-maidens sore from watch, they brought release, lowering the body gently toward rest. Linden blossoms, pale and sweet, were his favourite to gather at dusk, their fragrance drifting through the grove like a whisper of peace. Steeped in water, they made a tea of comfort, easing both heart and breath. It was said the linden carried the soul closer to dreams, as though the tree itself bridged the world of man and the realm of spirits. For this reason, Halfdan often saved it for nights when visions were sought, when kings prayed for guidance in matters of war and fate. Chamomile, soft and golden, was the gentlest of his arsenal, yet no less mighty. Its flowers, crushed and steeped, coaxed even children into easy sleep and soothed the bellies of warriors too long burdened by feast and drink. The flower of mothers, Halfdan named it, for it carried the warmth of care in every cup. By firelight he brewed these herbs in horn and vessel, mixing root with blossom, bitterness with sweetness, until the hall smelled of earth, meadow, and honeyed calm. As the kings drank, their shoulders eased, their breath deepened, and they surrendered to the night not in weakness but in strength. For with the herbal guardians watching over them, their dreams came unbroken, their rest profound, and when dawn rose pale over the fjords, they woke as if reborn, ready again to wield crown and steel. Thus did Halfdan and his herbs guard the night as surely as any warrior at the door. When the hall grew still, and the great fire dimmed to a low glow, the true craft of the night began. Warriors had their weapons, kings their thrones, but for the journey into rest, the Vikings trusted in potions and rituals, woven from the earth's bounty and bound by tradition. Evening was never left to chance. Sleep was prepared, shaped, and welcomed as a guest, its path cleared by herbs, smoke, and sacred routine. Halfdan the healer, keeper of the royal's well-being, knew the order well. First came the teas, steeped in vessels of clay or bronze, where steam rose like spirit breath. Valerian root to still the racing mind, hops to soften tension, linden blossoms to draw the dream world nearer, and chamomile to cradle the body in peace. Mixed with honey, sometimes thickened with milk, these drinks were not mere comforts, but medicines disguised as warmth. A single horn was enough to turn even the most restless warrior toward calm, his heavy limbs yielding to the pull of slumber. Then came the smoke, not from meat or firewood, but from herbs cast into the embers with care. Juniper crackled, filling the hall with sharp, cleansing scent, said to drive away spirits of unrest. Birch leaves smouldered gently, their sweetness curling into every corner, soothing those who breathed it. Sprigs of yarrow and thyme, bound into small bundles, were hung above the beds of nobles, the rising fragrance believed to guard against nightmares and foul visitations. The hall became not only a place of sleep, but a chamber sanctified by scent and smoke, where the spirit could drift safely beyond the body. These rituals were not random, but ordered with intent. The Norse knew that the mind must be guided from the clamour of the day into the silence of night, step by step. First, warmth and drink to calm the blood. Then, smoke and fragrance to cleanse the air and spirit. Finally, silence, broken only by the soft voice of the skald or the murmur of prayer. In this sequence, the hall transformed into a sanctuary of rest, where no fear nor lingering toil could intrude. Kings held to these customs as firmly as they did to law and battle order. A ruler who ignored them risked more than a sleepless night. He risked clouded thought, weakened body, and dreams that carried no counsel from the gods. To embrace the potions and rituals of the evening was to honour both body and spirit, to grant oneself not merely sleep but renewal. Thus, beneath the rafters of timber and smoke, Viking royals entered the night, as warriors entered battle prepared, protected, and guided by the wisdom of herbs. And when dawn came at last, they did not rise weary, but sharpened, as if the night itself had been their ally, reforging them in the stillness between worlds. The Norse knew well that sleep welcomed only those who earned it. A man who idled through the day found the night long and restless, but one who gave his strength to toil or training sank into slumber as into the arms of the sea. Strength before slumber was the creed of royals and warriors alike, for the body must be worked hard if it is to surrender wholly to rest. King Harold Hardrada kept this truth close even in his later years. At dawn, he trained with sword and spear, sweat gleaming on his brow before the sun had reached its height. His shield-maidens ran drills beside him, their bodies hardened by endless repetition of strikes and parries. When weapons were sheathed, there was no idle retreat. The day carried him to the fields, where he turned the earth with his thralls, or to the docks, where he hauled ropes and oversaw the crafting of ships. A king who ruled with his hands as well as his voice was a king who showed strength, and when night fell, that same labour forged the deepest rest. The sagas speak of warriors who rowed longships for hours against the pull of fjord currents, their muscles burning until even the act of standing seemed a battle. Yet when such men lay down, they did not toss in sleeplessness. They fell into rest, swift and sure, their bodies demanding repair, their minds too spent for useless worry. Sleep came to them as a faithful reward, heavy, dream-rich, and healing. Even the work of farming, humble in appearance, was part of this rhythm. Kings and jarls did not turn from the land, for they knew that ploughing fields, tending livestock, and gathering harvests bound them to the cycles that shaped all men. The ache of labour in back and limb was not curse but blessing, drawing the body into readiness for the long silence of night. For the Norse, whether king or commoner, strength was measured not only in battle but in toil, and both brought the kind of fatigue that sleep embraced. Halfdan the healer often said, "A body that moves with the sun rests with the moon." His words rang true, for the day's exertions aligned men with the turning of time itself. The heart beat steady, the blood flowed strong, and when night came, there was no struggle against it. To fight sleep was folly, but to earn it through labour was wisdom. Thus, Viking royals and warriors alike lived by this rhythm. Steal in the morning, toil at midday, counsel at dusk, and rest at night. By giving their bodies fully to the day, they gained the gift of undisturbed slumber, as though the gods themselves favoured those who wore their strength into the ground before surrendering it to the dark. And so each dawn found them renewed, rising fierce and ready once more, their vigour born not only from waking hours, but from the sleep they had so rightly earned. The sea was both battlefield and bedfellow for the Norse, and it shaped their nights as surely as it did their days. Long hours at the oars, bent backs, and tore calluses into hands, until every muscle throbbed with fire. Yet when the ships were beached and the men lay beneath furs, they did not stir restlessly as men of softer lands. They collapsed into slumber as if hurled into the abyss, their bodies so utterly spent that the night claimed them without struggle. This was the warrior's fatigue, the price of rowing, raiding, and hunting. And it gave them the deepest sleep a mortal could know. The shield wall demanded no less. To march across rugged coasts, to clash shield against shield, to swing axe and sword until arms trembled, such labour wrung the strength from a warrior as surely as blood from a wound. Yet it was this very exhaustion that became their ally. For when the hall grew quiet, these men did not lie awake gnawed by worry. Their bodies dragged them down into rest swift and unbroken, where wounds knit and the mind regained its sharpness. The sagas tell of warriors who slept so soundly after battle that not even the howling storm outside the hall could rouse them. The hunt, too, brought its weight. Chasing elk through dense forest, wrestling boar, stalking bear across snowfields, these tasks tested strength and patience alike. A king who hunted alongside his men returned weary, his limbs heavy, his lungs raw from cold air. But such weariness was no weakness. It was the promise of rest to come, a guarantee that night would fall, not with tossing and turning, but with eyes closed in an instant, dreams rushing in like a tide. King Harold Hardrada, famed for his tireless vigour, once declared that true sleep was won only by those who had spent themselves in toil or battle. A man who has not emptied his strength, he said, cannot fill it again. And so he lived his days carved with relentless effort, his nights claimed by the deepest silence of slumber. His warriors followed, for they knew that to awaken sharp of mind and strong of body, they must first give everything to the day. This fatigue, born of sea, sword, and chase, bound the Norse to a cycle as natural as the tides. By draining themselves in labour and conflict, they ensured that rest was not stolen in fragments, but granted in full measure. Their sleep was heavy, dream-laden, and healing, restoring both muscle and spirit for the trials to come. In this, as in all things, the Vikings turned hardship into strength. Even their weariness was a weapon, for it carried them into the kind of sleep that made them rise each dawn as though newly forged, ready again to row, raid, and conquer. The north was a land of storms. Winds tore across the fjords with the fury of giants. Snow fell thick enough to bury a hall, and thunder rolled like the war drums of Thor himself. To weaker folk, such nights brought only fear and sleeplessness, but the Vikings were children of this land. They did not rage against the storm, nor lie restless beneath their furs. Instead, they welcomed it as part of the world's rhythm. The storm outside became the stillness within, for they believed it was wisdom, not weakness, to yield to what could not be changed. In the halls of kings, storms were met with calm. When the winds shrieked and the timbers groaned, Olaf Tryggvason would gather his men around the fire and say, "The gods grant us a night to rest. Let the storm do its work, and we will rise stronger for it." Such words turned fear into acceptance, and the hall would settle into silence. Each man knowing the world beyond the walls raged so that they might be still. The roaring gale became a lullaby, a reminder that fate was greater than man, and that wisdom lay in bending to its will rather than breaking against it. The sagas tell of jarls who slept soundly through blizzards that drove beasts to madness. Their secret was not thicker walls or warmer furs, but the peace of mind that came from trust in fate. If the hall stood, then the night belonged to them. If it fell, then their time had come. Such certainty freed them from the gnawing worries that rob men of rest. In this way, storms that would have kept others wakeful instead delivered the Norse into slumber as deep as the seas. Halfdan, the healer, often reminded his lords, "A storm is no foe to the sleeper. The snow falls whether you wake or not. The wind howls whether you hear it or not. Better then to close the eyes and let the body gather strength." His counsel carried the weight of truth, for the Norse understood that rest was never wasted. It was a weapon honed in silence, a shield raised against the labours yet to come. To them, sleep was not idleness, but preparation, as sacred as the sharpening of a blade. The storm outside was a gift, stripping away the chance for battle or voyage and leaving only the call to rest. And so they yielded without shame, lying still while the world shook around them. Thus the Vikings mastered not only steel and sea, but themselves. Where others feared the storm, they turned it into ally, letting its fury cradle their stillness. The storm outside, stillness within this was the wisdom of the North, and it made their sleep a fortress as strong as any hall. When the fire burned low and shadows stretched like long fingers across the hall, the Norse knew the day must be set aside. No warrior, no king, could walk into sleep, still carrying the weight of quarrels, judgments, or battles past. To rest well, the mind must be unburdened, its knots untied before the body yielded to slumber. Thus came the rituals of peace, words spoken, songs sung, and memories laid gently down. Mind at peace, body at rest, this was the order of night. In Trondheim, King Harold Hardrada would summon his skald before the furs were drawn. The poet's voice rose steady and slow, weaving sagas of ancient deeds, victories long won, and heroes who had faced trials greater than any of the present day. These tales did more than entertain. They lifted the hearts of those who listened, carrying them from the troubles of the hour into the vastness of story. As the hall sank into quiet, the rhythm of verse smoothed the mind, giving each soul a path from wakefulness into the calm of dreams. Others sought peace through prayer or reflection. Warriors, weary from raids or training, sat in silence before the hearth, tracing the runes upon their blades or whispering words to the gods. They would recount the day's triumphs and failures, giving both to fate, and with that surrender their minds grew light. "The day belongs to yesterday," the shield-maiden Thyra was known to say. "The night belongs to no man. Let it cleanse you and wake unburdened." Her wisdom was echoed in practice, for none who followed it lay restless on their furs. In some halls, music filled the twilight hours, the harp's gentle plucking, the hum of flutes, or the low chant of a seer lulled the senses into stillness. Even the humblest servant shared in this ritual, for when the hall prepared for rest, all burdens were cast aside together. A man who quarrelled by day might laugh with his rival over a shared song by night, for sleep demanded no grudges. The Norse held this practice not as softness, but as strength. To sleep with a troubled mind was to wake clouded, yet to close one's eyes after laying down the weight of the day was to rise sharp and renewed. The sagas speak of kings who remembered every word of counsel, every name of ally and foe, and it was said their secret lay in how they prepared their minds for rest as faithfully as their bodies for battle. Thus, when the last words were spoken, the last notes faded, and the hearth sighed its final breath of warmth, the hall lay in true silence. The day was ended, the mind unburdened, and the body free to sink into the deep well of night. In this ritual of peace, the Norse found mastery over rest, and in that mastery, the strength to meet another dawn. As the day's labours ended, and the last scraps of bread and berries were taken. The hall entered a time as sacred as prayer and as necessary as food. It was the saga hour, when voices rose soft against the crackle of the hearth and stories flowed like mead into waiting cups. No hall was without it, for storytelling was the bridge between wakefulness and dream, between the weight of the day and the stillness of night. Kings and thralls alike leaned close to the skald's words, letting the cadence of tale and verse guide them from toil into rest. The sagas were more than memory, they were medicine. Warriors who had carried blood and fear in their hearts laid them down through the telling of greater deeds. The weight of personal burdens melted when set beside the trials of heroes long dead, whose courage in the face of doom gave comfort to the living. To hear of Sigurd's dragon slaying, or of Freya's love lost to fate, was to know that one's own struggles were part of the same great weave of life. And so, by tale, hearts grew lighter, wounds softened, and minds found the stillness required for sleep. King Olaf was said to favour such hours above feasts, insisting that no man should lie down without a story to carry into dreams. When his skald recited verses of ancient kings, Olaf would sit in silence, the firelight carving his face into shadow and gold. Only when the last word fell would he retire, certain that his mind was clear and his spirit ready to wander the realm of visions. For dreams, to the Norse, were not idle shadows but paths to wisdom, and stories lit the way toward them. Children, too, listened with wide eyes, drifting into slumber as the skald's words painted battles, voyages, and gods in the smoke above the hearth. Their dreams were filled not with fear of storm or darkness, but with the steady rhythm of those tales, shaping courage that would serve them in years to come. Even hardened warriors found release in these stories, their grief or rage dissolved into shared remembrance. What could not be spoken in council was spoken in verse, and what could not be endured by day was eased by night's tales. The saga hour was thus more than pastime. It was ritual, it was healing, it was preparation for rest. When the skald's voice faded and silence fell once more, the hall was not restless but soothed, each mind stilled, and each heart bound by the same great story. And so, beneath heavy furs and behind thick curtains, the Norse slipped easily into sleep, their dreams carrying the echoes of the sagas. To the Vikings, storytelling was not only the keeping of history, it was the key to slumber itself, the gentle hand that guided the soul from waking world into the mysteries of the night. When darkness wrapped itself about the land, and the wind clawed at the walls, the Viking hall became more than timber and fire. It was a fortress of warmth, a cradle of life, where every soul within shared in a bond of rest. At its heart glowed the hearth, steady as the sun, casting light upon faces lined by battle and toil. Around it, warriors unbuckled their belts, shield-maidens laid aside their spears, and children curled into the safety of their mother's arms. Sleep did not belong to one alone, but to the hall itself, for it was taken together, bound by kinship and steel. The king lay, not in a distant chamber, but close within the same hall, though raised upon his platform, and curtained in wood and wool. Around him, his chosen guards made their beds, forming a living wall of loyalty and vigilance. Beyond them, warriors stretched upon benches or straw, their bodies weary from labour, their hands never far from blade or axe. The rhythm of their breath joined with the crackle of the fire, creating a harmony that lulled even the most restless into stillness. Safety was not only in walls of oak, but in the nearness of trusted company. To the Norse, this closeness was strength. A hall that slept together was a hall that woke together, ready to rise at the first cry of danger. No king feared the night when shield maidens kept watch at his side. No child trembled at storm when the snores of warriors drowned the wind. Even the simple act of hearing another's breath in the dark gave comfort, for it reminded each soul that they were not alone against the cold or the unknown. This was social sleep, a weaving of rest that made every dream lighter and every body stronger. Saga tellers spoke of kings who travelled to foreign courts and found themselves unable to sleep in lonely chambers, robbed of the murmurs and warmth of the communal hall. Only when surrounded again by their household, the fire crackling and warriors breathing close, did rest return to them. The hall itself was a womb of security, where the strength of many guarded the slumber of one, and the slumber of one gave strength back to the many. Thus, the hearth and the hall shaped sleep into more than a private act. It was a shared ritual, a bond as vital as the shield wall. In that union, Viking royals found rest deeper than solitude could offer. When dawn broke, it was not only the king who rose renewed, but the entire hall together, bound by the night they had shared. In the north, no man truly slept alone, for to sleep within the hall was to be wrapped in fire, in kinship, and in the strength of all. Night in the north was never without peril. Storms battered the walls, wolves prowled the edges of settlements, and the threat of rival men lingered even in silence. Yet within the longhouse, the Vikings devised a pattern of rest that turned danger into safety, fear into calm. They slept in circles of protection, each man and woman lying in places that mirrored rank and duty, so that even in slumber the hall stood guarded. This order was not spoken of lightly. It was tradition, ritual, and shield to the weary. At the centre of this design lay the king, his bed raised high, curtained by wool and carved wood. He did not sleep apart in solitude, but at the core of his people, a living symbol of strength. Around him rested his chosen warriors and shield-maidens, the fiercest and most loyal, their bodies the first wall between ruler and threat. Their ears were trained to stir at the crack of timber, the creak of a door, or the howl of wind that did not sound true. Beyond them lay the broader circle of warriors, their weapons close, each man forming a link in the chain of vigilance. The outermost edge held the thralls, servants, and lesser folk, still part of the whole, their presence a warmth and murmur that thickened the sense of security. This circle was more than defence, it was comfort. A man in the centre slept knowing that many ears and many blades kept watch for him. A woman at the edge found calm in the steady breath and warmth of those around her. The very order of the hall-shaped slumber into something deeper, for no one need carry the weight of fear alone. The safety of one was the safety of all. The sagas speak of Thyra, the shield-maiden, who placed herself near the door each night, saying, "Let my dreams be the first broken if danger comes." Such loyalty was not rare but expected, for it was known that kings slept deepest when their chosen ring of protectors surrounded them. In this way, vigilance was shared, and no man was forced to lie with half a mind awake. Even the warmth of such an arrangement played its part. Bodies lying close created heat that the hearth alone could not give, turning the hall into a living forge of warmth against the bite of winter. To sleep in circles was to sleep with fire at the core and flesh as shield, a design that matched both nature and necessity. Thus, in the stillness of the night, the Norse found strength not in solitude but in ordered closeness. The king rested because his warriors watched, the warriors rested because they lay in ranks, and the hall itself breathed as one great body. Sleeping in circles of protection, they turned the vulnerability of night into yet another fortress, and by dawn they rose not weakened but renewed and unbreakable. When the hearth was banked and the last ember hidden beneath ash, the hall of the Norse sank into a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the world. No candlelight flickered, no torch guttered on the wall, for the Vikings did not fight the night with flame once rest was called. They yielded to the silence of dark, and in that yielding found a depth of slumber unknown to men who sought to keep the shadows at bay. This darkness was not feared but revered. Behind woolen curtains, thick as shields, the royal bedchambers became caves of stillness. Curtains shut out the faintest glow of moon or star, and the body was left in perfect night. The breath slowed, the blood eased, and the mind slipped quickly into dream. To the Norse, it was as if the earth itself had drawn them back into its womb, cradling them in silence until dawn broke the spell. Kings knew the strength such darkness gave. Harold Fairhair was said to sleep with his hall so blackened that one could not see a hand before the face. "Let the night be night," he commanded, "and the day will find me sharpened." He understood that true rest was not carved from half-light, but found only when darkness reigned unbroken. The hall, in its stillness, became a place where the body's rhythms aligned with the turning of the world, where night restored what day had spent. The silence was as vital as the dark. Without clamour, without distraction, the sleeper sank into depths where strength was reforged. The crack of storm outside was muffled by timber walls, the stirrings of servants softened by distance. Within the curtain-enclosed alcoves, kings lay as if the world beyond no longer existed. Their senses surrendered fully to the night. Such surrender was no weakness, but the truest mastery, for it meant trust in their people, in their hall, and in the rhythms of nature itself. Dreams came sharper in such blackness. Tales tell of rulers who awoke with visions etched clear in their minds, as though carved by the gods. Without flicker of flame to disturb them, these dreams lingered, carrying omens, warnings, or blessings. The Norse believed that the silence of dark was the favoured time for the unseen, to whisper, for in its stillness men could hear what daylight drowned. Thus, when dawn finally crept pale across the fjords, the hall stirred not from broken restless slumber, but from rest deep and whole. The silence of dark had worked its will, leaving kings clear-eyed, warriors strong-limbed, and women renewed. In this, as in so many things, the Vikings did not war against nature, but walked with it. They let the night be dark, and by that darkness they rose each day as if remade. The longest night of the year was never met with fear in the north. When the sun fell low and lingered little above the horizon, the Vikings gathered close within their halls, for they knew the darkness was not emptiness, but a vessel filled with power. The winter solstice was Yule, a sacred turning of the wheel when the old sun died and the new was born, and in that deep night dreams were said to burn brightest. To sleep during Yule was to drift nearer to the realm of the gods, and the visions that came were held as omens for the year ahead. In the hall, the hearth was stoked higher than any other night, its flames a reminder that even the longest shadow could not conquer fire. Kings and jarls presided over feasts of roasted boar and mead, spiced with herbs, meant to sharpen the dream sight. When the feasting ended, the skalds told sagas of past solstices, tales of kings who saw their fate in visions, of warriors warned of betrayal, of maidens granted glimpses of children yet unborn. These stories set the mind upon the path of dreaming, preparing each soul for the night's journey. When the hall finally sank into slumber, the silence carried weight. Curtains were drawn tight, furs laid heavy, and heads bowed upon pillows of straw and feather. Some placed sprigs of evergreen beneath their bedding, for it was believed that the living green drew favour from the gods and warded restless spirits. Others burned small bundles of herbs, juniper, yarrow, or linden, whose smoke was thought to open the mind to visions. The very air was thick with anticipation, for this was no ordinary sleep. It was the winter solstice dreaming, when the veil between men and gods grew thin. The sagas tell of King Hakon, who on Yule's night dreamed of a wolf devouring the sun, and soon after heard of enemies gathering at his borders. Another tale speaks of a shield-maiden who dreamed of standing upon a mountain of ice, only to find herself leading her kin safely through a treacherous winter. Such dreams were not dismissed as phantoms, but carried into council, their meaning weighed as carefully as any word from a chieftain's lips. Even the common folk held their dreams close during Yule. A vision of fire was said to promise prosperity, while water foretold journeys to come. Lovers looked for dreams of each other, believing it bound their fates together, while farmers prayed for dreams of green fields, a promise that the earth would once again awaken. Thus the winter solstice became not only a time of feasting and fire, but of sacred sleep. In those longest hours of dark, the Norse surrendered themselves to visions, believing that the gods walked nearest then, whispering truths into the minds of men. To wake at dawn, after Yule, was to rise, not only with body restored, but with spirit guided, carrying into the new year the wisdom of dreams born in the deepest night of all. Far from their longhouses and the safety of their hearths, Viking royals carried with them the art of sleep, as surely as they bore sword and shield. On raids across the storm-split seas, kings and jarls did not abandon the wisdom of the north. They adapted it, moulding their rest to foreign lands and shifting dangers. For they knew that the strength of a leader was not measured only in battle, but also in the calm that followed it. The sleep of kings abroad was a guarded thing, yet still rich with the practices that set them apart. Aboard the dragon-prowed ships, slumber was taken in shifts, the creak of timbers and crash of waves serving as lullaby. Furs and cloaks doubled as bedding, and warriors formed a ring of protection around their lord. In the cramped quarters, even kings rested shoulder to shoulder with their men, yet it was said they found deeper sleep than any, for the sea itself rocked them like a cradle. Those nights taught resilience, that rest could be seized even in the harshest places, and that the rhythm of the tide could carry dreams as surely as the hearth fire back home. When Viking rulers lodged in foreign courts, whether as guests, traders, or feared conquerors, their habits marked them. While other lords feasted until dawn, the Northmen took their leave early, retreating behind closed doors to claim the restorative silence of night. They brought with them sacks of herbs, skins of mead mixed with honey, and talismans of carved bone or stone, ensuring their sleep was watched over by both earth and gods. Those who observed them often whispered that the Norse carried an unshakable calm, as if their very dreams were weapons honed for the trials of morning. Even in hostile lands, Viking kings arranged their resting places with care. Their beds were placed where no sudden hand could reach them, often with a trusted warrior at the foot and another by the door. Curtains of wool and fur light to carry, heavy in protection, were hung around their chambers, warding both draughts and prying eyes. This blend of vigilance and comfort allowed them to rise at dawn with minds sharpened and spirits steady, never dulled by unrest or fear. The sagas tell of Harold Hardrada sleeping soundly before the clash at Stamford Bridge, though he was deep in the heart of England and outnumbered. Such tales were not meant to boast of recklessness, but of the iron composure of a king who could command his body to rest, even with war at the gates. For the Viking royal, sleep was more than survival. It was mastery, a weapon as crucial as the sword at his side. Thus, whether on storm-tossed seas, in the halls of foreign rulers, or beneath the shadow of enemy walls, the lords of the north remained masters of rest. Their wisdom travelled with them, unbroken by distance, unshaken by threat. Even abroad, their slumber was a fortress, and from its depths they rose to conquer dawn anew. The courts of Europe glittered with torches, chandeliers, and candles that burned long into the night, but in their splendour lay a ruin the Vikings would have scorned. For while the Norse knew that true strength was carved from darkness and silence, many kings of Christendom revelled in false day, stretching feasts into dawn, drowning their senses in wine, and masking fatigue with endless chatter. They mistook wakefulness for power, yet their bodies weakened, their minds clouded, and their reins often faltered under the weight of sleepless nights. The forgotten wisdom of rest, so carefully guarded in the north, slipped from their hands like sand through open fingers. In the longhouses of Scandinavia, darkness was revered, for it was the cloak under which the body healed and the mind sharpened. To the Vikings, a man who wasted his nights was no more than a man who dulled his own blade. But, in the candle-lit courts of Europe, light became an enemy disguised as luxury. Hours once meant for dreams were stolen, replaced with jests, quarrels, and hollow pleasures. The fire that should have warmed their slumber burned instead against the natural rhythms of the flesh, leaving lords heavy-eyed at council and sluggish in war. Feasting, too, was carried to excess, where the Norse dined heartily at midday and lightly before night. Foreign rulers filled their bellies with meat and wine, just as they laid their heads upon their pillows. Their sleep was broken by heaviness, by the toil of the body forced to labour when it should have been at peace. What the Vikings had mastered, the harmony of body, food, and rest, was forgotten in favour of indulgence that left even kings restless in their beds. The sagas whisper of Norse envoys who laughed quietly at the courts of Francia and England, seeing how their rulers squandered the very strength needed to hold power. For what use was a golden crown if the mind beneath it swam in fatigue? What use was a mighty hall if its master walked through it with hollow eyes and sluggish thought? The Northmen, though fewer in number, seemed sharper, fiercer, more awake to the world around them, and much of that came from this secret that was no secret at all, honouring the dark, honouring the silence, and letting sleep restore what the day had spent. So it was that the wisdom of the Viking knight was not spread across the kingdoms they touched. Instead, it remained their own, a treasure as great as silver and steel. In forgetting it, Europe dimmed its strength with its own lights, while the North carried into legend the image of rulers who were both fierce in daylight and masters of rest by night. To the kings of the North, slumber was no idle surrender, but the hidden throne upon which all sovereignty rested. Sleep was not weakness, nor the escape of weary men, but the silent forge where will was sharpened, wounds were mended, and spirit was tempered. A Viking king who mastered the art of rest ruled not only by sword and shield, but by the unseen strength that came from the hours when his eyes were closed. Sleep was sovereignty itself, an invisible crown placed upon the head of those who knew how to wield it. In their halls, the royal bed was guarded as carefully as the throne, for there, in darkness and stillness, the body of the ruler knit itself strong again after the toil of war and the burden of judgment. Bones softened from strain grew firm, muscles swelled with renewed vigour, and the mind that bore the weight of men's lives found clarity in dreams. The people knew this truth as well, for they looked to a rested king as they would to a sharpened blade gleaming, unbroken, and ready to strike when fate demanded. The skalds sang of sleep as the hand of the gods laid gently upon mortal brows. In dreams, kings heard whispers from Odin, saw signs of harvest or battle, and awoke not merely restored but guided. Sleep was prophecy, as much as it was healing. To scorn it was folly, for no warrior could outmatch a man who rose with divine counsel in his heart and the calm of true rest in his bones. Thus, sleep was revered not only as healer, but as weapon, a shield against weakness, a sword that cut through fatigue, a secret advantage over foes who spent their nights in wine and quarrel. It was said that a restless king would soon be a broken king, but one who ruled his sleep would rule his people with unshakable steadiness. This was the mastery Viking royals held above others. They bent their days to toil, their nights to stillness, and from this rhythm drew the strength to lead with iron resolve. In every longhouse and royal chamber, the lesson was the same. Rest was not retreat, but the root of dominion itself. So the sagas leave us with this truth. Sovereignty was not only measured in the clash of arms, or the wealth of silver, but in the wisdom of knowing when to let the body fall into silence. For in that silence, kings gathered the power to rise again, fierce and unyielding, as dawn struck the shields of their halls. Sleep, to the Norse, was life's greatest mastery, a divine gift, a secret crown, and the truest mark of a ruler.